Welcome to the Scent of Beauty. My name is Susan, and this video is titled Friction, Responsibility / Accountability, Part 4. In this video, we're going to talk about reclaiming responsibility and being accountable, being answerable to ourselves for our own actions. That's a gift. I suggest if you haven't watched the first three or listened to the first three videos, please pause this one, listen to the other three, then come back. Yesterday we talked about the pressure of air, and in a bottle, air could be filled with air. And if we tie a balloon and put the balloon in the bottle, we could blow into that balloon, but it won't expand because the air within that bottle is holding it. It's solid. But if we poke holes at the bottom of that plastic bottle and we blow into the balloon, we see the changes. The bottle starts to react and we see a new form taking hold, and at the end, we find that all the air has been released out of the bottle and the balloon has now replaced the air. And the top of the balloon can be just pulled off, tied together, and what occurs is another form that is trapped within. We asked ourselves who has blown air into our psyche and have a form within us that we pattern ourselves after. Yesterday we talked about being so accommodating. When we're 100% accommodating to another person or persons, then we have lost the resistance that we need. We need to have that personal substance within ourselves, just like that bottle. The bottle starts to make this crackling sound as it loses the air. What sounds do we make when we start to lose sense of our being? When I initially thought about friction, I thought about solid friction, the rubbing and tangible contact, difference of opinion, arguments, close contact. But matter is made up of liquid, and it's made up of gas, it's made up of solid, actually solid, liquid, and gas. But then I remember that fluid is not fixed. It can be manipulated. It could be easily deformed. And I thought about that because we are of chemical reactions in our brains. And so if a chemical reactions based on what others say to us can fix our shapes. Force friction. Force friction can be frightening. And how often is an individual frightened by a force that is coming at them, and so they change their shape? A force can be an angry demeanor, and to change the shape of that demeanor, how often does an individual smile when they are afraid? What about laughter being used to hide the anxiety? So if we could shape an object, right? If you think about it, so a fish, if I think about it, a bus, a car, again, I think I mentioned a plane. These are all by design, by their shape, if they're going to have more air friction or less air friction, and based on the friction, based on the drag, more compliance, less force. So if we don't put up any resistance, we just naturally go through others' air pressure, and we streamline ourselves. We pattern ourselves to reduce the frictions. That's why I love science and I love psychology, because it teaches us and it shows us how we lose our scent of beauty, but it also helps us to gain back our life form in our world. I touched on yesterday psychological synergy, right, where we lose our independence because we always believe that we have to have a cooperative group, at least one other individual to make us the subtotal. But we are I want to say that again, that we feel we need someone to help us to become subtotal. But what we lose in that process and don't remember is that we are a sum of ourselves. We are independent. Having two or more influences to meet a requirement that we learned in part one, that a lot of the time that was conditioning. And we have extended many leeways to have these labels placed on us: good, nice, acceptable, because we put up the least resistance. But there's another way. We have psychosynthesis. And psychosynthesis is an approach to psychology that expands the boundaries of the field by identifying that a deeper center of identity exists. And that's you and that's me. The postulate of the self, that's literally what it states. And it's time for us to erect ourselves in our own lives. It considers each individual unique in terms of purpose in life, places value on the exploration of being potential, human potential. Roberta Assagioli was an Italian psychiatrist, and he developed psychosynthesis when he was arrested in 1940, and he was accused of praying for peace and asking others to join in, and it was a fascist government at that time. So he spent 27 days in solitary confinement, and in that process, he was inspired to exercise his mental will by meditating on a daily basis. And he concluded that he was able to change his punishment into an opportunity to investigate his inner self. Roberta Assagioli, we know Sigmund Freud, we know Carl Jung, but he was one of the innovators. But what he innovated was psychosynthesis, the evolution of consciousness. We have learned so often to be relative to others versus relating to another individual. That's two separate things. We learned to be illicit, where we became elicitors, right, to another human being, to be drawn in, evoke, induce, to bring forth something else for another being. But what about ourselves? What about the responsibility and the accountability to ourselves? Roberta Assaglioli envisioned approach. He believed that there's a process of personal growth, personality integration, and self-actualization. And that is the question, who am I actually? Actually, who are you? So I just want to read some more of what he stated. The elimination of the conflicts and obstacle, conscious and unconscious, that block the complete and harmonious development of human personality is what we're discussing, what I'm discussing in this video. This psychosynergy that we have with other people versus psychosynthesis, to expand and let our pheromones be released unhindered. The use of active technique to stimulate the psyche function, still weak and immature. And that's our responsibility. What about a warm and comforting word to ourselves? What about the affection that we need in our psyche? The technique of believing that we have worth regardless of being labeled good, nice, and any other words in between. That's why we're here, strengthening our psyche. He said, let us examine whether and how it is possible to solve this central problem of human life, to heal this fundamental infirmity of man. Let us see how man can free himself from the enslavement and achieve an harmonious inner integration, true self, realization, and right relationship with others. And that is the key. There is nothing wrong with altruism, love, but it has to also incorporate ourselves. We have to incorporate our being. So we have to learn to identify with the lack of self for others to lounge. How often do you think about yourself in relation to another human being than you do or I do, just simply thinking about who we are and how fabulous we are and sensational we are individually, just thinking about that in regards to yourself, how sensational you are, how sensational I am. Roberta Assaglioli went on to say, the self is a way to present. To be in the moment is to know ourselves. When time has flown because of our busyness to appease another person, we are out of the present. He went on to say, to experience this permanent, unchanging center of consciousness, we have to disidentify from our roles and the passing content of our consciousness. He said, we are dominated by everything with which our self become identified. We can dominate and control everything from which we disidentify ourselves. where are we located? If we think about the bottle, who is within us and where are we? In the broad and close scheme of things, where are we? We're in consciousness, and we're going to have a conscience for ourselves, and that is the aim of the Scent of Beauty. So the last video, we're going to talk about being at the threshold of our being, and it is one of the most beautiful places to be. So thank you for listening, and welcome to the Scent of Beauty.